July 3rd, 2001, remote Western Australia outback, near the Air Highway. What happened to Ricky Meiji in the middle of the endless Australian outback was not just survival. It was a fight against silence itself. For days, no one heard him, no one saw him, and the desert slowly started taking away everything familiar. But this true survival story didn't start here. June 28th, 2001, a remote roadside stop near the Air Highway, Western Australia. Ricky Meiji was traveling through one of the most isolated stretches of land in the world, thinking it would be just another long drive across the country. He didn't realize how quickly the vast emptiness would turn against him. His vehicle trouble, confusion on the route, and the extreme distance between settlements slowly pushed him into danger. He kept moving, but every kilometer felt longer, and help never seemed to appear. Hours turned into days of uncertainty as he drifted deeper into isolation with no clear direction. Water became rare, communication disappeared, and the reality of being stranded began to sink in. By the time he understood the situation fully, there was no easy way out. The outback heat was brutal, and every step demanded more energy than his body could give. Search for help became a fight for survival, and survival became his only focus. He pushed forward with fading strength, relying only on instinct and whatever the land could offer. Each passing day stripped away his comfort, leaving only raw endurance and desperation. And this is where things take a turn. But what he would face next, in the endless silence of the Australian desert, would push his survival beyond anything he ever imagined. As hope begins to fade and the land reveals its true, merciless nature, setting the stage for a struggle that will define every remaining moment of his journey ahead now. The road didn't bring rescue, it only brought silence. Ricky kept waiting, thinking any moment a car would appear in the distance. But the outback stayed empty. No engine sound, no dust trail, just heat rising from the ground like waves from fire. At first, he told himself it would be quick. Someone would notice. Someone would come back for him. But as the hours stretched into days, that belief started breaking apart piece by piece. He looked for water everywhere he could. Every small sign of moisture mattered now. Every shadow became a place to rest his tired body. The sun was not just hot. It felt constant, like it was pressing down on him without stopping. Food was already becoming a problem. What little he had could not last long in these conditions, so he began to ration carefully, forcing himself to slow down even when his body screamed for more. Every bite felt smaller than the last. The hardest part was not hunger. It was realization he was completely alone. No landmarks that made sense. No clear direction back. Just endless red earth stretching in every direction, as if the world itself had ended here. At night, the cold changed everything again. The desert that burned him during the day now drained warmth from his body. He started to understand that survival here was not just about strength. It was about endurance through extremes that never stopped switching. His thoughts became heavier. Simple decisions took effort. Should he walk or rest? Should he conserve energy or search again? Everything had consequences now. Still, he moved, step by step, even when his legs felt like they were no longer listening to him. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice refused to give up. It didn't promise rescue. It didn't promise safety. It only pushed him forward. But the outback doesn't respond to hope, and as the days slowly disappeared into a blur of heat and exhaustion, Ricky began to realize something even worse was coming. And this is where things take a turn. The body always remembers when food disappears. At first, Ricky tried to ignore the hunger. It came in waves, sharp, then dull, then sharp again. But in the outback, hunger doesn't stay in the background. It grows until it becomes everything you think about. His energy dropped fast. Even simple movement felt heavier. Walking across the dry ground took effort he didn't expect. Every step started costing more than the last. Water was now the real priority. He searched carefully, scanning dry patches of land, hoping for even the smallest trace of moisture. Sometimes he would stop just to conserve strength, knowing that wasted energy could not be recovered easily out here. The land gave almost nothing back. Food became even harder. Ricky started looking for anything small enough to survive on. Insects hidden under rocks, tiny signs of life in the dry earth. Nothing was comfortable about it, but survival in this place was no longer about choice. It was about instinct. Each time he managed to find something, it was never enough, just enough to delay the hunger, not remove it. His body started changing in ways he could feel. Strength fading, focus slipping. Even standing still for too long made him feel weak. The heat during the day drained him, and the cold at night made recovery impossible. Still, he kept moving, because stopping meant giving up. He began to understand a painful truth. The outback doesn't reward effort. It tests how long you can continue without reward at all. Somewhere along the way, hope stopped feeling like a promise. It became just a thought he repeated to himself when everything else got too heavy. There were moments when silence pressed so hard it felt physical. No voices, no movement. Only wind and distant heat rising from the ground. And in those moments, survival wasn't about thinking ahead anymore. It was about surviving the next hour, then the next, then the next step. But as his strength kept fading and the land kept offering less and less, Ricky was about to face a new level of survival that would push him far beyond hunger alone. And this is where things take a turn. The outback doesn't fight you loudly. It wears you down slowly until you stop noticing how bad things have become. Ricky could feel that change now. His body was no longer reacting the same way. Every movement felt delayed, like his strength had to travel a long distance just to reach his muscles. Even standing up took a moment of preparation. The land around him didn't change much. Flat stretches, dry soil, endless open space that offered no clear direction. It wasn't just empty, it was disorienting. He started relying more on small decisions: where to rest, when to move, how long to stay in one place without wasting energy. Everything became about balance, not speed. The sun controlled his day completely. When it rose, survival became about dealing with heat. When it dropped, survival shifted to cold. There was no comfortable middle ground. He searched for water more carefully now, focusing on areas where moisture might exist underground or in shaded ground. But most of the time, he found nothing. Just dry earth that cracked under pressure. His mind started to feel the impact too. Thoughts didn't stay clear for long. He would forget small details, then suddenly remember them hours later. Time itself began to blur. Days were no longer counted properly, only felt through exhaustion. Food was now almost secondary, not because it didn't matter, but because finding it had become so rare that it was no longer part of expectation. He survived on whatever small sources he could manage, but even that was becoming harder as his body weakened. Still, something inside him refused to fully stop. Even when logic said rest, he moved. Even when his body begged for stillness, he kept searching. That decision, repeated over and over, slowly became the only reason he was still alive. But the environment was not finished with him yet. The deeper he went into survival mode, the more the outback stripped away everything unnecessary: comfort, energy, even clarity of thought, until only instinct remained. And soon, instinct would be tested in ways he could not prepare for. And this is where things take a turn. There comes a stage in survival where hope stops feeling loud. It becomes quiet, small, almost invisible. For Ricky, that stage had arrived. His body was now running on empty most of the time. Strength came and went in short waves. Some moments he felt like he could keep moving. Other moments, even standing still felt like too much. The outback had not changed, but his perception of it had. Now every step had to be earned. Every movement had a cost he could feel immediately afterward. Rest didn't fully restore him anymore. It only delayed the next drop in energy. Food was no longer something he searched for normally. It became something he reacted to. small signs of life in the ground, tiny insects hidden under rocks, anything that could give even a short burst of energy. Nothing felt natural about it, but survival here was never about comfort. It was about staying alive one more day. Water remained the constant focus. He learned to watch the land differently, paying attention to shaded areas, dips in terrain, and places where moisture might briefly collect after rare weather changes. Most of the time, it led to nothing. But he had no other choice except to keep looking. His mental state began shifting under pressure. Time stopped feeling structured. Days blended together. He would wake up without fully remembering when he had last slept properly. The body kept moving, but the mind started losing its sharp edges. There were moments when everything went quiet inside him. Not peaceful, but empty. As if the survival instinct had taken over so much that emotion had less space to exist. But even in that condition, something remained. A refusal to stop, not strong, not loud, just persistent. That small force kept him moving through heat, through cold nights, through exhaustion that never fully left. And still, the outback continued to push back, because survival in this place doesn't end at exhaustion, it continues past it. Ricky was now entering a phase where adaptation mattered more than strength, where instinct would decide everything left ahead of him. And this is where things take a turn. At this point, survival was no longer about planning. It was about reacting. Ricky's body had reached a breaking point where even basic movement felt unstable. Hunger and dehydration worked together now, draining him from both sides at once. His strength came in short bursts, then disappeared again. The land still showed almost nothing. Dry earth, cracked soil, and heat that didn't seem to end. But survival sometimes depends on the smallest changes. And then something shifted. A rare moment of rain. It didn't come as a storm that fixed everything. It came in a short, unpredictable change in weather, enough to break the absolute dryness of the ground. For someone in Ricky's condition, even that small amount of water meant everything. He used whatever he could to collect it, staying close to the ground, watching where it pooled, moving slowly so he wouldn't waste energy. Every drop mattered more than anything else in that moment. But the relief didn't last. Once the rain passed, the desert returned to its harsh silence again. And with it, the struggle for food became even more desperate. At this stage, Ricky's survival instinct took over completely. He began using whatever the environment offered, tiny insects, worms, and small creatures hidden under rocks or damp soil. In extreme survival situations like this, even things most people would ignore become sources of energy. Reports from his survival indicate he adapted to consuming whatever he could safely manage, including unusual sources found in stagnant water areas. There was nothing comfortable about it. It was pure survival. His mind stopped reacting strongly to disgust or fear. Those feelings had been replaced by necessity. If something could keep him moving, it became part of survival. Emotionally, things also became unstable. Some moments he felt alert and determined. Other moments he felt distant, like he was watching himself survive instead of living it. Exhaustion changed the way his mind processed reality. But even in this broken state, he kept going, because stopping still wasn't an option his body accepted. The outback had stripped everything away: comfort, structure, certainty, leaving only raw instinct behind. And now, that instinct was about to guide him towards something he hadn't felt in a long time: a possible direction forward. And this is where things take a turn. By now, Ricky no longer measured survival in days. He measured it in whether he could still move. His body was extremely weak, but something subtle began to change in the way he read the land. After weeks of endless emptiness, small patterns started to matter more than distance. Slight shifts in terrain, faint traces of movement, anything that didn't feel completely dead. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt identical in every direction. For the first time in a long while, there were moments where the landscape suggested possibility instead of pure emptiness. Not safety, not rescue, just direction. Ricky followed it carefully. Every decision had to be calculated against his remaining strength. Walking too far without results could cost him the energy needed to survive the next day. So he moved slowly, stopping often, letting his body recover in short pauses before continuing again. His condition was critical, but his mindset had changed. Earlier, survival was about reacting. Now it was about choosing where to go next. That small shift mattered. The outback still gave almost nothing, but Ricky began orienting himself toward areas where survival chances were slightly higher. Places where terrain changed, where signs of water or life might exist even briefly. It wasn't certainty, it was probability. Mentally, he was still under extreme strain. Fatigue blurred his thinking. Hunger never fully left, but alongside all of that, a quiet determination started returning. Not hope in a loud sense, just persistence. He kept moving, step by step, even when the distance ahead didn't promise anything. And slowly, something changed in the rhythm of his journey. The environment no longer felt like a completely endless trap. There were subtle breaks in it now, small variations that suggested he was not entirely off direction anymore. But the outback doesn't give relief easily, and even when progress begins, it often comes with one last test before survival finally turns in your favor. And this is where things take a turn. Ricky was not walking like a healthy man anymore. Every step was slow, heavy, and uncertain. His body had been pushed far beyond normal limits. Hunger, heat, and exhaustion had stripped him down to pure survival instinct. But he was still moving. That alone kept him alive. The outback around him had started to feel slightly different in recent days. Not safer, just less absolute. There were subtle signs that he was not completely cut off from human activity anymore. Distant tracks, slight changes in the land, things that didn't belong to pure wilderness. He followed them, carefully, because one wrong direction could mean days more of suffering. By this point, Ricky's thinking was simple. He didn't plan far ahead anymore. He only focused on what was directly in front of him. One step, then the next. Rest when needed. Move when possible. His body was weak enough that even hope felt like effort. Then, after 71 days in the Australian outback, something changed. He reached an area where human presence was real. Signs of life, activity. A connection to the outside world that had been completely missing for weeks. Ricky was eventually discovered by people from a cattle station in the region. He was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and barely able to stand. But he was alive. Rescue didn't feel immediate in his mind. It felt distant, almost unreal. His body had spent so long in survival mode that safety was something it struggled to process at first. But slowly, it became real: water, shelter, people, help. The silence that had surrounded him for more than 2 months was finally broken. Later, the full reality of his survival became clear. 71 days alone in one of the harshest environments on Earth, surviving extreme heat, starvation, and isolation in the Australian outback. What remained was not just a survival story, but a reminder of how far the human body and mind can be pushed before they refuse to give up. And even after rescue, one truth stayed behind. In the outback, survival is never something you choose. It's something you endure until the land finally lets you go.